Are you searching for the best in online black radio? Then go to blacktalkradionetwork.com, helping you filter through the noise. Real talk, black talk.
Context of white supremacy, justice, Gus T. Renegade, in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Sunday, November 4th, 2012, so I have been told. We want to get right to it. Invest if you think the program is constructive. You can also let people know about the cows. If you think black people, non-white people would benefit from hearing the program, some of our guests, if you think it would help them solve problems and get some clarity about things that are happening on planet Earth, share the program. Facebook, Twitter, websites. Let as many non-white people know about the program and any other constructive information that will help us replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Joining us for the 17th time, always a pleasure to have her on the program. She just concluded doing a radio program. I mean, that right there, really devoting as much of her time and expertise to solving this problem as possible. Author of the ISIS Papers, third-generation physician, general, and child psychiatrist, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Dr. Welsing, are you with us?
I'm with you, yes.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us. As I said, it's always, we are just real thankful that you, we know you're working on lots of stuff, and we just really appreciate the chance to just sit, learn from you, and get some of that expertise to help solve this problem, hopefully. Before we get started, I know you were in the D.C. area, the big storm that just came through. How have you been doing? I know folks would like to know that you've been making it okay despite everything.
Fortunately, I have to knock on wood, I didn't have any major problems it did a lot of raining and the wind blew a lot, but the electricity stayed on, and I can't complain, and certainly can't complain compared to what some people have gone through and are still going through.
Absolutely, absolutely. Glad to hear it. We can go right with the storm, racism, white supremacy. It was 7 years ago. We had Hurricane Katrina. Lots of black people suffering, died as a result of what happened in Katrina, the breach of the levees, and the acts of white supremacy terrorism after the breach, where many white people took that opportunity to go out and kill black people. That was another big story that was not reported as much as the looters. This time around with Hurricane Sandy, we had Glenda Moore, black female. Her two children died in the storm. Her white neighbors, they wouldn't help her out. Just the past 2 days, they've been releasing a lot of photographs of black people, non-white people, being outside in long lines trying to purchase gas, and they had one black male, they had snatched him up and put him on the hood of a car. They said there was an altercation and they were arresting him. Standard operating procedure. Just wanted to get some of your thoughts. What have you seen with regards to any racism, white supremacy, and what's been happening with the storm?
Well, I haven't really seen a lot of direct racism. What I have thought a lot about is that this tragedy and loss of life and loss of homes makes me think about any kind of participation in the Middle East or other places in Africa where wars are going on, and the killing of people and the destruction of their homes, that this should, in my view, give us cause to think about, wait a minute, should there be this mass killing of people on the planet and destroying their homes and destroying their schools and their churches, etc.? And if we are participating in any way in America, are we getting blowback? I think that, sometimes you look at television and you see all the destruction that's going on in the Middle East and then also in some countries in Africa. And, that's tragic, and you just go on to the next program. But when it comes home, it gives you an opportunity to think, wait a minute, are we causing devastation to happen any place on this planet? Is the hand of this country involved? And if so, all of us should think about it. And I also thought, how much money is being spent to wage war, and that same money could be spent building infrastructure, and people could have employment, all the people who are suffering because they're not employed. What if the money was being used so that people had jobs and housing instead of using money to build weapons and to destroy life? And those are some of my thoughts.
Wow. I want to come back to the coverage of the storm when I get to some of the questions I have about the presidential election and President Obama, but also wanted to touch on some of the current events, things that have been happening in the past few weeks since the last time we had you on the program. Did you hear about the case involving Sharmika Moffett? It's a black female in Louisiana. This happened 2 weeks ago, that there was a report that she had been set on fire by three white males wearing hoods, and KKK was written on her vehicle. It was reported that she had burns over 60% of her body. This was reported 2 weeks ago tomorrow. And then about 2 days later, the police enforcement officers, they came out and reported this was a hoax, that the evidence they uncovered, the black female, Miss Moffett, that she set herself on fire and made a false report that these three white males did this. They said they had a fingerprint on the lighter. They said they had some other DNA evidence. They didn't go into details, but this came out on Tuesday, and they were definitive. They were saying this is a shut case, slam dunk, all the evidence points to Ms. Moffett, and the DA came out a week ago and said that there likely will be charges filed against Ms. Moffett for fabricating this story. Have you heard about this? What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, I had heard the basics that, first that initially, as you said, there were the charges that were that she made that someone else did it to her, and then to find out that at least the reports that came out saying that she had done it to herself. And it sort of reminded you of Tawana Brawley years ago in New York, where a young black woman claimed that she had been assaulted by some white males. And and it turned out, or at least that was what the findings were, that she too had made up the story. And so I think that it's tragic, and it's a sign of sickness for people to do that kind of distorting for whatever the reasons. And I don't know whether this young woman intended to have these serious burns on her body, but that certainly is a tragedy.
I did speak with a representative of the Louisiana branch of the NAACP, and he said that he's going to be following up on this case. He said he's still waiting for the report to be released, final report with all the evidence. He says he's very interested in seeing that. He said it should be out in about 30 days, so I plan to follow up on that myself. What would you say to black people who see an incident like this and say, see, that's why I don't want to hear a lot of talk about racism. A lot of times black people will complain or make an allegation of racism, and it's not true. They're just making it all up, and that's why I don't want to waste a whole lot of time hearing about racism. What would you say to a victim who said something like that?
Well, I would say that they need to broaden their understanding of what racism is, and thanks to the work of Neely Fuller, Jr., the first to look at racism as a total system structure. You see, because black people have been in this area of the world for approximately 500 years, and there has never been a moment, there's never been a day when racism, white supremacy was not operative if you include formal slavery as a phase of racism, white supremacy. Up to the present, when you have the first black president and he is being demeaned and degraded, and you have powerful people sitting down and planning from the time he took office to say that they are going to do everything in their power to see that he fails. And that goes along with, see, any black person who thinks that racism is just some false accusation, they just don't understand what they are dealing with. Racism has everything to do with all of the black men who are incarcerated, all of the black families who do not have fathers in the home, and all of the black male children who are, and young people who are being killed on the streets and not graduating high school, more people being in prison than in colleges. See, people have to ask, why is this happening? What is going on? And look at the entire history and fabric of this country and in the world, and look at how people of color are being treated. And so they get a full understanding. I mean, you might have somebody who is having trouble getting employment. And even though there are people who are white who are having difficulty getting employment, is a black person having a more difficult time that therefore causes the black unemployment rate to be twice as high, in some instances 3 times as high as whites? So again, we have to, as Neely Fuller says, if you do not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand will only confuse you. See, some people don't realize that the music that large numbers of young black people listen to, that has, you know, the language of niggers and dog and gangster and thugs and bitches and hoes and bow wows, they think that's just entertainment. They don't understand that that is psychological brainwashing to black people, causing black people to think less of themselves as they should. And the white people who listen, and there are more white people who listen to that than black people, but the white people are reinforcing their attitudes that depriving black people of opportunity is okay, because listen to how these people talk about themselves. They call themselves niggers, so why shouldn't I think of them as niggers and treat them as niggers? So again, this is the work of the 21st century for black people. Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, in his book, The Soul of Black Folks, told us in 1903, that's 109 years ago, that the problem of the 20th century is the question of the color line between the lighter and the darker races of mankind. That he said that is the problem, the great problem of the 20th century. And that problem is still ongoing, which is why, even though we have a black president, he's had more death threats than anybody else. And as I said, powerful people saying they want him to fail, even if it means that the country doesn't move forward as rapidly as it could. The most important thing is to see that a black man fails. And so the challenge for the 21st century, our challenge as black people, is to, number one, understand racism, white supremacy as a system, not for the purpose of spending any energy or time hating white people, but understanding the system that has been structured by people who classify themselves as white for their genetic survival as a tiny minority of people on the planet who are genetic recessive to the people who can produce skin coloration. That our challenge is to understand what racism is, understand what, like I wrote something today and I said, to have knowledge and to understand what racism, white supremacy is black intelligence. To counter racism is black self-respect. And black mental health consists of doing both. To understand it and to counter it. Replacing racism, white supremacy with justice so there can be peace on this planet. That is our work, and if we respect ourselves, we will take that work seriously. And no one should seek to be respected by anybody else if they do not first and foremost respect themselves. And if we respect ourselves, then we will seek to understand in depth what is happening to us. See, we should all be alarmed when somebody gives a report on education and black students are not performing at the high level that they need to be performing. See, we should all be concerned about that. Or if we learn that black people have salaries that are less than other people, we should be concerned about that. See, Neely Fuller talks about the system of white supremacy functioning in economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war. The system functions in all of those areas of activity to maintain the power equation of white power over a relative non-white powerlessness. And it controls patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response. And that power equation of white power over non-white powerlessness is essential for white genetic survival on a planet where white people constitute fewer than 1/10 of the people on the planet. And the vast majority of people are black, brown, red, and yellow, and all of them are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to genetic recessive white-skinned people. So we have to have a new paradigm of thinking or new narrative where we really begin to understand and answer the question that black people are asking 1,000 times a day. Hey, what's happening? What's happening? The brain is pushing that question out because our functioning demonstrates that we really do not know what is going on. We think we do. We've been told that we're in a democracy, but we keep experiencing that this is not a democracy where everybody is equal. That's why the struggle is going on about voting suppression. Is vote suppression going on in this election? Is somebody tampering with the voting machines to make certain that President Barack Obama, a black man, that he's not going to have a second term? All of this that is swirling around is a result of the reality of racism, white supremacy. But within this system framework, by and large, black people are being programmed to sing and dance and clown and not be serious about themselves. I could say to sing, dance, and clown, and to be breeders and to stud. This is the same activity that we were allowed to engage in on the plantations, where we had to breed and stud to produce more slaves, and those slaves could be sent off as children to different plantations. It's no different than people producing children when they're not ready to take care of children, and the children go into foster care, and they go from one foster home to another foster home, and they're mistreated and they're abused, and then they become dysfunctional, which is where the system of racism, white supremacy needs black people to be. I used to use the term inferiorization, turning people who have sufficient genetic and constitutional potential, but turning them into functional inferiors, so that people who classify themselves as white can look at black people and say, wow, look at that rubbish. I'm superior to that. See, that's what we don't understand and what we have to begin to understand. And I'm not talking about hating white people. The only thing I'm talking about is the same thing that, let's say, a football coach would talk about. You playing against another team, and you have to understand where the other team is coming from, what their offense and defense strategies are. And you have to understand and review and look at all the different plays and look at different games and master an understanding of defense, offense strategy that a particular team is using. And so if you're playing against that team, you have to, on your side of the field, understand what plays you need to make offensively and defensively. Same thing in chess. Chess is a better analogy. I mean, a good analogy, because in the game of chess, the objective of the game of chess is for the white king to checkmate the black king. And that's what racism, white supremacy is all about. Checkmating the black man for the purpose of white genetic survival on the planet. See, a long time ago, they used to lynch and castrate the black man. Now they make the black man into a functional inferior through unemployment, failed education, removing fathers from the home. You remove fathers from the home when men do not have employment. If they don't have education and employment, they cannot play the functional role of husband and father. And so that's the way the system achieves that objective. And that will weaken the development of male offspring and allow for the effeminization of male offspring. And if you effeminize black men, then the white collective doesn't have to worry about white genetic annihilation at the same degree. So these are things it's just like studying the moves on a chessboard. These are things that we have to understand, because the people who classify themselves as white, they designed a system for their genetic survival. And they perceive black men in particular as being the number one threat to white genetic survival, because only men can impose sexual intercourse. It's just like on the plantation. You didn't have Sally Hemings raping Thomas Jefferson. You didn't have African women raping slave masters. No, slave masters were raping African women. And they imposed rape on African women, forcing the men, black men, African men, to have sex with the women to produce slaves, so that slaves could be used on the plantation and slaves could be sold. So we have to look deeply into, first of all, understanding the system, what the system is really all about. And if the system doesn't tell you the truth about what it's about, then we have to read and study and observe and be serious about ourselves so we learn how to observe and analyze and understand what is going on around us. And we have to learn how to stop being envious and jealous of one another. A lot of the black people who have negative things to say about Barack Obama, that's black self-hatred. And it's envy and it's jealousy. Because Barack Obama, any black parents, mother and father, if they had a son and he finished school and he went to college and he finished college and then he got a job and he got married and he has a wife and he has children and he's taking care of them, that's what any parent would want to see. That's what any black parent would want to see from their children. So how could any grown black person participate in demeaning President Barack Obama other than the programming in the system of racism, white supremacy, of black self-hatred? As a matter of fact, 9/10 of the people on this planet are non-white people. 1/10 are white. The 1/10 have been able through domination, because they understood for their survival they had to dominate and control the people of color. And so then they knew they had to teach the people of color to hate themselves, because if they taught the people of color, promoted valuing themselves as people of color, loving themselves, respecting themselves, and respecting one another, then the people would never submit to domination. So you have to train them that they're ugly and they look like the devil, and give them an image of God as white. And so you can thoroughly subjugate them. And then you program, once you teach them to hate themselves, then they will fight and kill one another. But they will not attack the oppressor, who is the image of God in their minds. So we can give the system A+. It's unjust and it's tragic, but in other words, they set out, we've got a problem on the planet. We are a tiny, tiny minority. We're genetic recessive. How are we going to survive? What do we have to do? And so they circumnavigated the planet, subjugated everybody, taught the people to hate themselves, and they still hate themselves. Non-white people all over the planet are trying to buy something to bleach their skin and hanging dead hair on their heads, trying to look like white people. So we have to embrace ourselves and love ourselves and kind of pat ourselves and say, wait a minute, we have got to get over this. We have got to understand what has happened to us and really look at the fact that the creative force in the universe made black people the mothers and fathers of everybody on the planet, including the mutants to albinism. We're the parents of everybody. Nobody has more than we have in terms of the substance that they are made out of, because we're the parents of everybody. But we have been conquered, subjugated, psychologically damaged. But we have it within ourselves to be able to analyze and perceive what has happened to us and to determine that we're going to be everything that the creative force intended us to be on this planet, and to understand racism, white supremacy, and be determined to replace it with a system of justice where nobody is mistreated, nobody is allowed to be mistreated, and those who need the most help get the most help. Now that's our mission of seriousness. If I could wave a magic wand, black people would come completely out of clowning, dancing, and singing and step deeply into seriousness. I encourage people to look at China Central Television. And so you can look at the Chinese people, the fastest growing country, a nation of people on the planet, and look at their seriousness of purpose and look at how they focus on their history, respect their history, respect their elders, respect learning. So we need to, because we do need models. We need a whole lot of models, and looking into history and looking at, what other people who have decided to be serious on this planet, to look at what they're doing and to have goals about eliminating poverty and educating the population as opposed to killing. But racism, white supremacy cannot survive as a system without killing large numbers of people. All the time, killing. Money being spent killing as opposed to, building infrastructure, employing people, educating people, health care, really high quality health care for everybody. So we've got, a magnificent challenge in front of us. And respecting who we are as the parent people on the planet, we should say, well, now let's see. Let's step into doing all that, being all that we can be, and replacing racism. You see, you can't walk around racism and act like it's not there. No, racism, white supremacy is here front and center. So every single problem that a black person can talk about is tied directly and or indirectly to the power dynamic of racism, white supremacy. So we've got to, can't walk around it, have to go through it and end it. But we could end racism as you had a critical mass of non-white people on the planet deciding that they were going to respect themselves, people of color respecting themselves, black people respecting themselves, not wanting to be white, respecting themselves deeply. White supremacy would collapse because it takes a large number of non-white people who hate themselves and who are willing to fight and kill each other to help hold up racism, white supremacy. So we need to reflect on that. Wow. It's not just 1/10 of the people on the planet who are white who are upholding white supremacy. They get a whole lot of help from the programmed non-white people, the non-white people who have been programmed to hate themselves, and all over the non-white world, whether it's in Asia or Africa, South America, people of color are trying to bleach their skin and trying to look white, and don't know that they have something magnificent in those cells that produce a black pigment, melanin. So we live in challenging times.
Absolutely. Context of white supremacy, again, our guest, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. I wanted to touch on one of the points you raised surrounding President Obama. When I spoke with you yesterday, I was sharing that you have told us repeatedly reading is more important than watching television. And in that spirit, we've been doing study groups, kind of a book club every Friday evening. We've done quite a few books at this point. The book that we're on right now is Our President, 44th, Dreams from My Father, President Obama's autobiography. And I was telling you yesterday that some portions of it, he seems to be a little bit less confused. And this paragraph, I wanted to read it, get your thoughts on it. President Obama, he writes in the context of this segment, he is having a
What page are you on?
I have the PDF, so my pages don't match up to the paperback, but it's in chapter 4.
Okay.
Chapter 4, he's having a conversation with a non-white female. Her name is Joyce, and apparently she's quote-unquote mixed race. She has a white parent and a non-white parent.
So she's non-white.
Correct. And so President Obama, he gives his response to hearing her talk about being quote-unquote mixed race. He writes, They. That was the problem with people like Joyce. They talked about the richness of their multicultural heritage, and it sounded real good until you noticed that they avoided black people. It wasn't a matter of conscious choice necessarily, just a matter of gravitational pull. The way integration always worked, a one-way street. The culture could be the minority assimilated into the dominant culture, not the other way around. Only white culture could be neutral and objective. Only white culture could be non-racial, willing to adopt the occasional exotic into its ranks. Only white culture had individuals, and we, the half-breeds and the college-degreed, take a survey of the situation and think to ourselves, why should we get lumped in with the losers if we don't have to? We become only so grateful to lose ourselves in the crowd, America's happy, faceless marketplace. And we're never so outraged as when a cabbie drives past us, or the fact that we're never so outraged as when a cabbie drives past us or the woman in the elevator clutches her purse. Not so much because we're bothered by the fact that such indignities are what less fortunate coloreds have to put up with every single day of their lives, although that's what we tell ourselves, but because we're wearing a Brooks Brothers suit and speak impeccable English, and yet have somehow been mistaken for an ordinary nigger. Chapter 4 from Dreams from My Father. Thoughts on that passage?
Well, I think it's absolutely wonderful. Give the president an A+ for that segment of that chapter. In other words, he's talking about the reality of what takes place in a system of racism and white supremacy. And when a white person engages in sexual relations with a non-white person in that system, it is not solving the problem. It is creating a problem and creating a person with a lot of conflict on the inside. At least the president has been able to articulate what some people escape talking about. And as the system attempts to, right now, during formal slavery, the system had made so-called mixed race, first generation mixed race, by slave masters raping African women. And so the current mixed race, what is being fostered is black men and white women, so that you are producing an offspring. In slavery, the mother would be black, and the mother would pass on psychologically to the child, you're black. But when the mother is white, in a system of white supremacy, she's telling the child, you're not black, which every black man who's with a white woman, when the woman tells the offspring, you're not black, he should understand what she's saying about what she thinks about black. You see, if she says to a non-white child, you're not black, and they're black people that are of exactly the same shade, whatever the shade of that particular black child is, you're not black, and she is saying black is not good. And it's a tragedy that you're not all white. So then you put that person in some role, and what kind of role are they going to play? Because they have been taught by their mother to hate themselves as a black person. But that's a requirement under the dynamic of racism, white supremacy.
President Obama, he talks about skin bleed. In fact, he has another passage where I would give him an A+, where he talks about he's in the doctor's office and he sees a magazine where a black person has used a bleaching cream and bleached the pigment out of their skin, and he said it frightened him, and then it made him angry, and then he wanted information. He had questions about why this was happening, and he said that his white mom, she used to tell him about being proud to be a black person and telling him all this history about all the wonderful things black people had done, and she used to brag about how attractive Harry Belafonte was. But he said just seeing that image of the black person bleaching their skin, he knew that there was something that he had not been told. He was missing pieces to the puzzle. It's a fascinating passage. What would your response be to black people? And I feel like we've discussed this before, but it's heated up more just because it's election time. What would your response be to the black people who say, well, there are black people who do help out racist man and racist woman, and I am not going to support them or think, hey, this person is still a teammate of mine, even though they are confused or even though they're helping out racist man, racist woman. They look at President Obama and they say his policies haven't really helped black people. He's not really talking about racism, white supremacy. He's not really doing anything to erode this system. I'm not a fan of his, and I'm not going to support him just because he's non-white black male. What would your response be?
Well, now, see, just think about that. The person who is saying that, what are they doing about the system of racism, white supremacy? I mean, President Obama is doing what any black person in that position is doing. Any black person who works for a person who classifies him or herself as white is not doing their own thing. Any black person who is made the CEO of a company, they can't bring in all kind of black people and help other black people. Now, President Obama has done a number of things that will be helpful to black people. The money he's given to the historically black colleges, and the jobs that are being developed, and the health care. Black people are benefiting from that. But he is not able to do any more than any other black person. Like Neely Fuller says, if not him, who? You? What other black person could have a job as the top person in the White House who could solve all of black people's problems in the context of a system of racism, white supremacy? He himself is catching hell. He himself has to deal with death threats, threats to his wife, threats to his children. So no, understand the system of racism, white supremacy. It's just like every black person. If a black person comes along and says, I'm not subject to racism, white supremacy, then they can go in the supermarket, fill their cart up, and pass the cashier. Don't try to sneak out the door. Pass the cashier and say, this is a part of my reparations. I'm not paying for it. Or when they get to a stoplight, don't stop, keep going. Forget the rules of the system of racism, white supremacy that has traffic lights and laws that say that you can't fill your cart up and push on past the cashier and walk out of the store. So President Obama is a victim of racism, white supremacy, just like all of us. And he is not going to transform the situation of racism, white supremacy by himself. Pray God that he gets a fourth term and that every self-respecting black person knows that he is representing us. And if somebody says they want to make him fail, definitely know that that's any one of us, and be determined out of black self-respect. No, I'm going to do my part to help this one black man do the best that he can. And I'm going to help myself do the best that I can, and I'm going to help any other black person do the best that they can that is within my framework, as opposed to being programmed to be envious and jealous of each other because they're just a few crumbs that are being dropped around, and to hate one another and to fight one another. See, we have to become aware of all of that and how that works.
Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Wow. I will give out the number. Folks out there listening, if you have questions, 760-569-7676. And the code is 564-943-pound. Press star 6 if you have a question for Dr. Welsing. In your book, The ISIS Papers, you have a chapter, 23rd chapter actually, where you talk about the crisis in black male, black female relationships. Is it a false problem? Just current events. Reading the newspaper, reading is more important than watching television. Two things popped up that reminded me of this. One of them, black male comedian D.L. Hughley. Comedian number one, make sure I repeat that. He is paid to go on stage and tell jokes frequently. He came out when Don Imus made the remarks about the black females at Rutgers and called them nappy-headed hoes. He came out and defended Don Imus and said that they were nappy-headed hoes. He has a book out where he says that black females are angry and he doesn't like them, and he gives more explanation. He's been doing a lot of interviews. He was on NPR and he did about a 20-minute interview with a black female where they talked about this in depth. That incident, and then...
Is that current?
Yes, ma'am. This interview on NPR happened 2 weeks ago, or not even 2 weeks ago. I think it was in the last 7 days. It's current. I can send you, I'll fax it to you. I'll fax you the transcript. Okay. But yes, okay. This is current. The book just came out the end of summer, and this interview just happened where he was talking about how he doesn't like he's married to a black female, by the way, but he doesn't like black females and they're angry. And the second incident was on, I think, a bus. This happened in October. It was a black male bus driver in his late 50s, and he violently punched a black female. She was in her late 20s. They had a verbal argument that went on for a while. This got videotaped. They had a verbal argument that went on for a while, and then it got physical, and he violently punched her in the face, and this became...
Is she the one that hit him first?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
I thought both of those current events, they kind of highlight that conflict between black females and black males. I just wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, see, what I would say is understanding racism as a system, racism, white supremacy as a system that is about white genetic survival. And so that means that the black male is perceived as the number one threat to white genetic annihilation because males can impose sexual intercourse. So the females may have the genetic material, but females cannot impose sexual intercourse. So black men have been the target the main target. Racism and white supremacy is against black people in general and black men in particular. So any sense of frustration that a black male is experiencing comes from the system of racism and white supremacy and the white collective and white male collective determining that black men are going to be in the deprived place that they are in. Now, as long as Mr. Hughley is not focusing on how I can defeat racism and white supremacy, because he's not looking at that as his main problem. But that is the main problem that is preventing him from being a man. So then, instead of taking his frustration out on the system of racism and white supremacy, he finds himself demeaning black females. So black men and black women, if they do not understand racism and white supremacy, then their frustrations can be taken out on one another. And so that's why it's very important that we both understand it. Black men and black women, I mean, imagine a triangle, and you have at the base, you have a black man in one corner, a black female in another corner, and at the apex of the triangle, you see racism and white supremacy that is putting pressure on the corners, those two people at the base, and all throughout the triangle. And so if the black man and the black woman were really able to focus on the problem, that they have a problem in common, and that problem is racism and white supremacy, which is, number one, preventing the black man from being all that he can be, and that therefore impacts how he can relate to the black female as husband and father. But if they were both looking at the problem, they would both be coming closer and closer together, because they, instead of looking at each other as the problem, they would be approaching the common problem of racism and white supremacy. But I dare say, certainly, excuse me, in as much as, our programming in a system of racism and white supremacy is to look at white as God. Angels are white. God is white, according to the imagery that the system of racism and white supremacy gives us. So we are very busy loving white. In one of my lecture series, a black man raised a question: how come black women are so involved in going to church and loving the white Jesus? And my answer to him was, why are black men so busy looking at pornography and looking at white women? It's the same programming under the system of racism and white supremacy. So, again, we have to, again, as Neely Fuller says, if you do not understand white supremacy, racism, what it is, and exactly how it works, everything else that you think you understand, I'll add, inclusive of male-female relationships, will only confuse you. See, racism and white supremacy, to the extent that it can determine whether a man has a job, what his income will be, how far he goes in school, will determine what happens in the male-female relationship. And the same thing goes for the female, but the war is less pressure. It's horrendous pressure on both. But the pressure is magnified on the male because the war is about the determination for white genetic survival. So that means that the black man has to be dead, has to be incarcerated, has to be shot, police brutality, driving while black, walking while black, thinking while black. But if we understand the war, each individual black person begins to understand the war and how they can conduct their behavior to counter the war which is why everybody needs to read Neely Fuller's work, Textbook for Victims of Racism, White Supremacy. So that's what I would say to, I'm so sorry that Mr. Hughley does not understand. Maybe he's too busy making jokes. And racism, white supremacy is not funny. And it's not a joke. And I dare say he would be out of business if he started talking seriously about racism, white supremacy. Because by and large, white men who will give him a job would not give him a job if he focused on racism, white supremacy, and started talking about how much he didn't like that.
Wow. Wow. I'm so grateful for that response. We will have to make that a sound clip. Wow. But I didn't want to move on. Did you it seemed like you knew about the fight, the altercation on the bus with the elderly.
Right. You see, but now I don't, again, I would try to look at that like a judge is going to ultimately look at that situation. The bus driver has a responsibility to the passengers, and I think that this person had started creating a problem with some of the passengers on the bus. Is that what happened?
The video.
There was a problem, and the bus driver has a responsibility to move that bus and to try to protect the people who are on the bus. And so I understood that she struck him. Now, I don't know whether the bus was moving or what. I don't know. And I'm not justifying. I mean, it's not justifiable for the woman to have hit him. But, some judge, some court will decide, was he playing the role that he should have played? In other words, let's say if she had a knife or she had a weapon, what was he supposed to do? See, what if a woman on an airplane had a knife and she started going down the aisle in the airplane and she was going to attack the pilot, and there were men sitting in the aisle seat? Should they hit her? What if she said, I have a bomb? Should she be stopped? So I don't,
Yeah, I mean,
let's get the facts.
It definitely is a sad day on the plantation for that to be happening under any circumstances. I mean, in my view, that is, again, further part of our programming. I know a lot of people, they were really disgusted and saying that's black manhood in the 21st century that you can...
See, but that's black men and black women attacking each other because they don't understand the system of racism, white supremacy, or they are afraid to look at. Do you see, I wrote something one time that says, woe be unto the people who love their slave masters more than they love themselves. So if we fell in love with ourselves and fell in love with each other, we would be helping racism, white supremacy come to a screeching halt. So, there's nothing that black person does to another black person, I don't care what it is, that is greater than what the system of racism, white supremacy has done to that black person and all the generations that preceded them, and what is still being done to any offspring that they may have, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren.
Again, context of white supremacy, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. Current events, I will say it again, reading is more important than watching television. And I mean, that should be bold print highlighted right now, because racism is in the paper every day. They are talking about it, all areas of people activity. They just had a report last week. One of our callers, Non-Mighty Wick, dialed in. And this AP Associated Press, they say they did a study that found a 3% increase in anti-blackness, and that's the term that they use, negative attitudes about black people. Did you see that report, and why do you think that was released?
Well, we're in a system of racism, white supremacy. And so black people are not liked in the system of racism, white supremacy. And the more nervous people get, like the people who classify themselves as white are getting very nervous because they have been told that they are becoming the minority population. And so there's going to be increasing levels of anti-black sentiment. You know, if I could wave a magic wand, there would be people who classify themselves as white who would be talking to other white people. I know that there are some white people who talk to non-white people, playing a Jesus role. But I'm talking about white people talking to other white people about their behavior that flows from their fear of white genetic annihilation, their behavior that flows from not liking themselves as albino mutants compared to the larger human family of people of color on the planet. Do you see? I mean, all we have to do is just watch the extent to which the white people in the news have started putting on orange makeup. Bill O'Reilly, Mitt Romney, everybody. Do you see? Or suntanning, coloring themselves, meaning I don't like white. But at the same time telling people who already have color that they're ugly and training them to dislike themselves or put tattoos all over themselves. They put tattoos on as a form of putting color on it. Black people engage in monkey see, monkey do. And the African proverb says, monkey was so busy doing what everybody else was doing that one day monkey cut his throat. See, we need to think about why am I doing that? Why am I trying to bleach my skin? Why am I putting tattoos on my skin? Why did I buy this wig? Am I being influenced by racism, white supremacy? I wonder how this will impact my behavior. Let's say I'm a black person and I start bleaching my skin because I don't like my skin color. So I see another black person coming towards me. How am I going to relate to that person based on how I relate to myself? See, we just have to embrace ourselves and hug ourselves tightly because we have been worked over by the system of racism, white supremacy. But to the extent that we can start embracing ourselves and being patient with ourselves and understanding ourselves and beginning to really understand in depth what the system is about, like Neely Fuller says, what it is and exactly how it works, and really begin to think about the system of racism, white supremacy is upheld by non-white people disliking themselves and willing to fight and kill one another. And that's why Neely Fuller's 10 stops, and I call them exercises in black mental health and black self-respect. In building a counter-racist culture, he says, stop name-calling one another, stop gossiping about one another, stop cursing one another, stop snitching on one another for reasons of personal gain. Stop being discourteous and disrespectful to one another. Stop robbing one another. Stop stealing from one another. Stop fighting one another and stop killing one another. Now, can you imagine if we as black people, we say, okay, by the end of next year, we're going to master those behaviors. It would transform what is going on in the areas where we live. And I say stop using and selling drugs to one another. Stop black children from thinking that as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. Black people need to be 30 and 35 years old before they reproduce so that they have an education, they have job training, they can be self-supporting, and people need to be married before they produce children. So the children have the benefit of two adults, a mother and a father, working together to take care of them under these conditions of war, of racism, white supremacy. And parents maturing, being educated and maturing, not trying to have children when they are children themselves. They don't have the maturity. They don't have the experience. They don't have the personal strength to take care of a child for 25 years. So that that child is really able to stand on his or her own feet in spite of the conditions. Because if people try to have children very young and they become overwhelmed and frustrated, and they start yelling and screaming at the children and calling the children out of their names, and so they're building a personality where the child, instead of learning love thyself at home, they're learning hate themselves because that's the way frustrated parents are talking to them. So people don't feel bad, but it's like we have to begin to understand we are not going to be taught this in a system of racism, white supremacy. The system is not going to teach us how to be maximally developed human beings. That has to come from our understanding and our own determination. So I add to that, stop throwing down trash where black people live, work, and play. See, if the white system of racism, white supremacy has us talking trashy because it sees us as trash. And anybody who feels that they are trash will not be happy until there's a whole lot of trash around themselves. Broken bottles, paper, trash. It'll just happen automatically because the brain computer has been programmed to think of the self as trash. Trash and dirt. Not deserving. So add to that. Stop pretending that racism, white supremacy does not exist. Stop allowing the system of racism, white supremacy to program black, brown, red, and yellow people against each other. So just deciding, if a person said, I'm going to practice no gossiping, or they might select, I'm going to practice no name calling, call people by the name that they wish to be called. Stop name calling one another. So there'll be no niggers, no bitches, no hoes, no gangsters, no thugs, no freaks. It'll just be John, Anita, Bill, something, but no name calling. So people can select if they want to counter racism and enhance black dignity and black self-respect. You know, after the civil rights movement, when black people came out and started talking about black power, black is beautiful, black respect, the system of racism began to understand, wait a minute, these people had their respect at such a level that they were willing to go up against guns and billy clubs and horses and dogs to liberate themselves. So the system said, wait a minute, people who respect themselves will not continue to be oppressed. So we have to change that right away. Now, what can we do? Oh, we can tell them they're going to be movie stars. And we can put them in movies, and we will make them the images. They'll be selling drugs to each other and cursing one another, and the men abusing the women abusing themselves. And we will have them descend from black is beautiful, black pride, black power. We will have them in the trash bin, and they won't even know what has happened to them. And we can do that because we can pay them. They don't understand racism. So we can pay them. We will give their entertainers large sums of money. And we will have these entertainers glorifying trashy behavior. And they will want to identify with the entertainers because they make a lot of money. And those will be their role models. So we will pay for them to turn themselves into trash. And they won't even understand what is happening. Because we prevent them from understanding the system of racism, white supremacy. And we program every time they turn on the television and see white, 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 white. White, 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 white. We are programming them to want to be white. So our system is secure. And we won't let them talk about racism. We'll punish them every time they talk about racism. We'll tell, oh, you're playing the race card. Oh, can't you do better than that? Oh, you people are always trying to play the race card. We'll shame them. We'll try to shame them so that they won't get a clue as to what is happening. Well, anyway.
Wow. And you have mentioned melanin and albinism a couple times during the broadcast already. Mm-hmm. I have an audio clip that I have been dying to play for you for about 2 weeks. I think Bruce Fine wanted to hear your thoughts on this as well, to see if this clip reveals anything about your theory of white genetic annihilation. But before I play the clip, I just want to read. This is from the National Journal. This was from August of this year. They were talking about the election, and they were talking about the declining numbers of white people. And the report, it got to the end, and they wrote, Republican strategists clearly feel the weight of trying to assemble a national majority with so little support among minorities, non-white people, that they must win 3 in 5 whites. This is the last time anyone will try to do this, one said. A GOP coalition that relies almost entirely on whites could squeeze out one more narrow victory in November. But if the Republicans can't find more effective ways to bridge the priorities of their conservative core in the diversifying next America, that weight will grow more daunting every year. And this whole article is about declining numbers of white people and what that will mean for future and I've heard many white people saying this is the last time white people can have a deciding big vote in the election. Their numbers are not going to be this high when it comes around again in 2016. The clip on albinism, I'll play. It's about 3 minutes. I hope Dr. Welsing can hear it clearly, and then I'm so excited to get her thoughts on this. This is from October 2012, a white woman giving her thoughts on albino animals.
So years ago, I was a camp counselor, and I took a group of kids to the San Francisco Zoo to see an albino alligator. It was the first time I had ever seen an albino alligator, and it was feeding time. So the albino alligator got really excited and turned hot pink as the blood was coursing through its body. So me and all these 7- and 8-year-olds were equally stunned by this insane hot pink alligator. And that is when I began to become obsessed with albino animals. Albinism is a recessive genetic disorder passed on from parents who give their offspring 2 sets of this recessive gene, which inhibits production of melanin, which gives us our color. Their offspring then appears white, extremely pale, has pale hair, pale skin, and pale eyes. Albinism is rare for 3 reasons. 1, it's a recessive trait. 2, albinos in the wild cannot camouflage. They are really obvious in their surroundings and therefore are an easy target for predators. 3, albinos that do make it to reproductive age can't find a mate because they look funny. Scientists think albinism can appear in any vertebrates. So there could be an albino horse, a deer, a crow, a dolphin, a cow. White peacocks are often mistaken for albinos, but in fact they're just white peacocks. White tigers that you may have seen in the Siegfried and Roy show or at the zoo, those are actually not albinos, those are white tigers. And you would be able to tell the difference if you saw a white tiger with no stripes at all, because no melanin means no stripes. If you have no melanin, you're an albino. If you have a little bit of melanin, but not as much as most people, you're an albinoid. And in humans, there are 2 kinds of albinism. One is ocular, which affects just your eyes. So if you have extremely pale blue, watery eyes, you should ask for a genetic test and find out if you are an ocular albino. The other kind is oculocutaneous, which affects skin, hair, and eyes. So our ocular system really relies on melanin to help us see. And if you don't have any melanin, you have impaired vision, which is why albinos often have sight problems and even blindness. What happens when you think about albinos all the time? You come up with amazing ideas, like this one, for an all-albino zoo. Just imagine the gorilla, albino, the crows, albino, the alligators, albino, all the albino animals together in one place in a zoo. Well, obviously this is a great idea because these animals would not survive in the wild, so we're doing them a favor by putting them in captivity where kids can throw peanuts at them, because that's still a better life than dying immediately from a predator attacking you when you're a baby. So I think this idea has serious legs, and I think you should all come to Caitlin's Albino Zoo sometime in the future when I get the Kickstarter project up and running, and I can make it happen.
Context of white supremacy. Dr. Welsing, were you able to hear what she said clearly?
Yes, I think that's just wonderful.
Does that relate in any way to your theory of white genetic?
Well, absolutely. I mean, in other words, albinism is a aspect of nature. Do you see? But it is, as she said, it is a genetic deficiency state. But this is what white-skinned people are, and this is why white-skinned people cannot mix with people of color because it's a recessive trait. I mean, they can mix, but they won't stay. They won't stay white. They'll be colored. And I think it's just fascinating that she. What about a whole zoo of albinos? That's just like when the African people pushed the albino mutants out of Africa and they wandered up into Europe. And they produced a whole race of people. there's a group of Indians in Panama, the San Blas Indians, and for some reason they produce a lot of albinos. And when Europeans first saw them, they thought they were shipwrecked Scandinavians, but they were albino mutants from this particular population of San Blas Indians. But they don't allow them to interbreed with the major population, because then you would have a buildup of recessive genetic traits, and then the people would have a difficult time surviving in a climate where there's a lot of sunshine. But I remember some time ago I gave a lecture at a medical school in D.C., I think it was probably George Washington University, and I was talking about crest theory and albinism. And so one of the students said, Dr. Welsing, because these are all white students, and the student said, Dr. Welsing, maybe that's why our research animals, we have a lot of albino research animals, white mice, white rats, because they're like us. And I said, I think that's right.
Fascinating. I started doing a weekly segment. It's called Albino Affairs, where we just take 5 minutes and see what the latest news surrounding albinism is. And I guarantee you can check every week. I guarantee you, white people will have several reports that focus on albinism, and many of them, they'll have the same enthusiasm that you heard in that audio clip, where they're just, oh my gosh, there's an albino. I mean, it doesn't matter what it is. There's a town, I forgot where it is, but they have a large population of albino squirrels, and white people are just in love with these squirrels. They have made them the mascot of the town, and they said the same thing. They wouldn't survive out in the wild, so they made all these rules where you can't kill them, and it's like they have a pet population of albino squirrels that just hang out in
and that nothing should happen to the albinos. Put them in the zoo so that nobody will bother them.
Wow.
See, and this is what apartheid is about. So you have a phenomenon of gentrification going on in major urban areas, where white people are coming back to the cities. But they don't come back to the urban areas where black people are and say, well, we can live together. No, they want the black people to leave. They want to push the black people out, so when they come back, it'll be just all them. So I say this is the foundation. This is the foundation of racism and white supremacy. A long time ago, maybe in the 70s, I think it was, they found a baby albino gorilla in Spanish Equatorial Africa. And the farmer saw an adult gorilla raiding the banana plantation. And so, of course, he got out his gun and killed the black gorilla, the adult. And when he went up to the black gorilla that he had just killed, he saw that it had a baby white gorilla attached to it. And this became a great big news story. It was on the cover of Life magazine, Time magazine, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the world went out the first baby white gorilla. They didn't call it an albino. The first white gorilla, and this became a huge story. They named the little baby gorilla Snowflake. And they took the baby gorilla to a zoo in Barcelona, Spain. And they, if you found a little baby white gorilla, you'd probably say, well, okay, it's an albino, help it grow up, teach it some manners. But the white people got a baby black gorilla of the same age and designed a gorilla IQ test to see which one was smarter, the baby white gorilla or the baby black gorilla. And I asked people, who do they think they found was the smartest? Well, to make a long story short, they found that the baby black gorilla was first in every single task that they gave the baby gorillas. And so they said, well, this has to be a mistake. Maybe the sunlight got in the baby white gorilla's eyes, and so he couldn't see the task. Then they put the baby gorillas in front of a mirror, and you can look this up in National Geographic. They put the baby gorillas independently in front of a mirror, and the baby black gorilla just looked in the mirror and started checking out his parts. And they said the baby white gorilla ran away from its image.
Wow. No coincidences, listeners. I kid you not. I just found out about Snowflake the gorilla this week. When I was doing my research, they have a whole article. I just read this like days ago.
Oh, interesting.
It says Snowflake the gorilla arrived at the Barcelona Zoo in the mid-'60s to great fanfare, including an official reception thrown by the mayor of the city. Snowflake was captured by a farmer in Equatorial Guinea under tragic circumstances. The farmer killed all the gorillas in Snowflake's group just to capture him. He was found clinging to his dead mother's fur. Through a series of middlemen, Snowflake found his way to Barcelona Zoo, where he settled into a comfortable life. He went on to father 22 babies, none of which were albino. In September 2003, it was announced that he suffered from a rare form of skin cancer, most likely caused by his albinism. Thousands of visitors came to pay their respects before he was euthanized a month after the announcement, and they have a photograph of Snowflake the gorilla. Wow. I will
See, if they didn't have an albino mate, then the only thing they could hope for is maybe a normal gorilla might have a mutated gene, but that would be very rare. So they would always end up, with a non-white, a black gorilla.
Wow.
But interesting. I forgot that Snowflake had passed.
They and this is worldwide. You can check. Doesn't matter whether we're talking Wisconsin, Florida, Australia, Barcelona. White people and their fascination, obsession. That was the word the white female in the clip used. Obsession with albino organisms worldwide, just like the system of white supremacy. I had one last, and then there's some folks with questions. And I think this relates. Just paying attention to words. Someone used the term yesterday, tan, and the sentence that they used it in was, your father is going to tan your hide. And I stopped and I thought, wow, that is so interesting. So I went to the dictionary and I looked up the word tan, T-A-N, tan. Noun form of the word tan, a yellowish brown color, the overall color scheme of tan and cream. And then the next one is a golden brown shade of skin developed by pale-skinned people after exposure to the sun. So that's tan as a noun. Now then, if you go to tan as a verb, it's informal, to beat someone repeatedly, especially as punishment. And then the sentence that they give for an example is, if Mickey touches a fishing net, I'll tan his hide. And I just looked at that and I thought, wow, I'm sure that is no coincidence that you have the same word, the same sound connected to the process of melanin deficient people darkening their pale skin, and then you got this same word is also connected to the act of beating or punishing someone. Does that what does that say to you, Dr. Welsing?
I have to think about it, but it's like tanning, beating somebody black. Do you see? Or if a white person, if you're spanking a white person, then you will see their skin would turn red. You see, because you will be bringing the blood to the surface of the skin. And so they would have color, wherein normally they would be pale. So whether that's the association, I have to give that some thought.
I'm going to be thinking about that as well. Even Snowflake, they just said that he died. He got a form of skin cancer. I think a lot of white people, it is a form of punishment, at least for their skin. At least if we're talking from a medical perspective, it
well,
is.
do you see, but white people, they remind white people to put on sunblock, so that they don't develop cancer. Because melanated skin, the melanin helps to absorb, the pigment helps to absorb the sun ray, but people who don't have melanin don't have that same kind of protection, which is not to say that black people cannot get skin cancer, but white people can get skin cancer and melanoma cancers more often than black people.
Thought exercise. I will spend some more time pondering on that myself. I do see the folks on the line. I'm just going down the order that the people called in. If you have a question for Dr. Welsing, your line should be open. The person that called in from a blocked number, if you're on a blocked line and you had a hand up, your line should be open. Did you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Good to hear from you, 909.
Oh, greetings. It's good to hear from you, Dr. Welsing.
Okay.
I have a question. I have two questions, but I don't know.
Speak as loud as you can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was saying that I have two questions. I think one you might annoy you a little bit. It's about Barack Obama and him and Tyler Perry. And my other question was about...
Do one at a time, dear.
No, I was
what
asking...
about Barack Obama?
Yeah, okay. Well, when I think about Barack Obama, I just always remember, and I have had discussions about, I remembered you guys said that there's no amount of money that should be accepted for a black male to be, to put on a dress and do the things that Tyler Perry does in his movies. And, like I said, I was having a discussion, and I was thinking that, Barack Obama, he's commander-in-chief. I mean, it's a lot of civilians that died supposedly under his authorization and whatnot. And I just feel like I was just thinking, like, there's no amount of money that, a black person should take to be a murderer, basically, mass murderer. And I just was wondering what your thoughts was on that.
Well, do you see, ideally, I would want President Obama to have the same understanding that I have about racism, but then he wouldn't be president. Do you see, and if you had the same understanding about the system of racism, white supremacy, you wouldn't be president either. I mean, you would not be allowed to be president. You have to be thinking about democracy. You can't be thinking about, I am in a system of racism, white supremacy. And so, as Neely Fuller said, if not him, who? You? Meaning any other. It's just like if you were, let's say if you were a CEO of any company under the system of racism, white supremacy, you became the first black person to be in that role. Well, other black people might be thinking, now you ought to bring a whole lot of black people in and give them jobs and give them good salaries. And you might think you could do that, but you wouldn't be able to. You would be under the control of the system itself. And that's why it's important to be able to have knowledge and understand. In other words, as a black person, you can't do anything that you want as a black male. You have to, ideally you would have had education as to what to do as a black male when you're stopped by the police. You can't do anything that a white person can do and get away with it because you are under a particular system. Like Neely Fuller teaches that if a black man is stopped by a white police officer who might have determined that he's going to kill a black man today, and he can do it by making the black man mad, so he'll call him a nigger. And if the black man jumps bad, he'll just shoot him. Say, I thought he had a gun. I thought he had a weapon. That's why I had to kill him. And that's called justifiable homicide. So you would be in that position like President Obama's in the position that he is in under the conditions of a system of racism, white supremacy. So nobody can say what so-and-so ought to be doing. You can determine what you are going to do as an individual black person in the system of racism, white supremacy. But I couldn't say, you know, if you're stopped by a police officer, you should tell him off, call him a racist. I wouldn't tell you to do it. I wouldn't advise you. Neely Fuller says the response is, yes, officer, no matter what he calls you. Yes, officer, what is it that you want me to do with my hands? Where do you want me to place them? Yes, sir. Because you don't need to die that day. You might have a major role to play in helping other people understand racism, white supremacy.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I don't necessarily see Barack Obama as a mass murderer, but I've heard people say that, you know, things like Gaddafi and it all happened under his watch.
It's like, you know, the same people, you have to ask them, now what do you think about being a victim yourself in the system of racism, white supremacy? What's your position? I mean, you're talking to those people. What's your position about the million black men who are in prison? What's your position about the 70% families, single-parent families, that don't have husbands and fathers? What's your position about all these black male children who are depressed and suffering because they don't have fathers in their home? And by and large, the reason being because they don't have employment. They're blocked from employment. See, we have to help ourselves and help each other understand, because the tendency is, you know, it's like on the plantation. The slave master might come through and beat 25 people just for the hell of it. Rape a woman in front of a man that she thought or wanted to think about being her husband. But the slaves can't do anything. That is, unless they are ready to die. So they are upset and frustrated, and they take it out on each other. What did the Attorney General say? Are we a nation of cowards, being unable to talk about racism? The reason people don't talk about racism is because they are afraid. The Jews in Nazi Germany were afraid to talk about anti-Semitism. Freud didn't talk about anti-Semitism. They absorbed it. So that's why it's important to understand, what is this system about? You see, the system said we are going to make this black man fail. Simply because he's black. We're not going to support anything that he tries to do. And we're going to demean him and ridicule him every chance that we get. Now, it's wise to understand that they're talking about all of us. All of the black men who are stopped from being everything that they could be. All of their sons who are blocked from being all that they can be. Because the system has targeted black men as the number one threat to white genetic survival. So we have to respect and understand ourselves and respect as best we can and understand the situation that we are all in, and then each individual person can decide, okay, now I see racism, white supremacy, if I'm not in denial about that. Because very often the same people that will criticize President Obama will deny, oh, there's no such thing as racism. That's something in the past. They deny it so they don't have to think about it. It's too overwhelming to think about. Too frightening. I mean, think about it. A black man is in an automobile doing nothing but driving down the road. And he sees some lights flashing behind him. He knows that he could die that day. Now that's the fear. So I don't talk about that. I mean, how many times do black men get together, they're sitting down, maybe looking at a football game, and start talking about how afraid they are of the white man and afraid of somebody stopping them on the road and thinking they're going to be killed. A young lawyer was in my office last week telling me how many times he had been stopped in the last few months. Has a new black Cadillac. It's not, I mean, it's new to him. It was not brand new. Is he stopped repeatedly? He's just a young lawyer. So as long as black men do not talk about their fear, like if I, was in charge, it would be, annual conferences. I said this many years ago, black men would sponsor a conference. We are afraid of the white man. And they wouldn't be ashamed. They would just be talking about reality. It would be a big annual conference. And you want to see some respect for black men because all kind of reporters, well, what are you going to do? Well, you're talking about you're afraid. What are you going to do? Say, we're too afraid. We don't know yet. We're just going to talk about it. We're just going to talk about our reality because that's self-respect. See, that would be curative because it would be facing reality as opposed to saying, I'm not a victim of racism. I have never experienced any racism. I don't know what that Dr. Welsing woman, she's talking about racism all the time. I don't know what she's talking about. I've never been a victim of racism. See, so we have to kind of come through that. Try to wade into the water of truth. What do they say? Truth will set you free. Not pretense, but truth will set us free. And there's no shame in being able to say we're afraid. We are afraid of what will be the consequences if we focused on our reality, the reality of our parents, the reality of our great-grandparents, the reality of our great-great-grandparents. For a start, going back 500 years, we're just going to reflect on that. See, that's why black people do a lot of loud shouting and making a whole lot of noise, loud laughing and loud talking, loud music to drown out the reality of racism, white supremacy. We need to be serious and quiet. Talk about we are afraid. And by talking about it, maybe we will gather our courage and our strength to deal with this reality. Let me tell you my prayer I wrote for black people liberation prayer. Thou who art blacker than 1,000,000,000 midnights, thou whose eyes shine brighter than 1,000,000,000 suns, thou whose hair doth coil tighter than 1,000,000 springs, radiating all energy throughout the universe. We beseech thee, one and only one, to give us total strength to carry out thy will for the universe, to establish justice and live in peace. See, thou who art blacker than 1,000,000,000 midnights. That can help us kind of get oriented to our black selves, hopefully. Next question.
909, did that take care of your two questions?
I was going to ask another, but I know you have other people that want to ask questions, so I don't know if I should or not.
Let me snatch the other three people that are waiting, and if we have time, you can ask another one. Will that work?
Okay.
Cool. Three. I think this is Praz. Praz, if you had a question for Dr. Welsing, your line should be open.
Yes. Greetings, Dr. Welsing. I had a question for you about the area of education. I was wondering, like in surviving college, graduate, and professional school, how should we avoid the temptation to totally submit to racism, white supremacy, in order to have, let's say, our master's thesis accepted or have a favorable clinical evaluation?
Well, it's like, I think if you understand the situation that you're in, like when I was training in psychiatry, you have to, they teach you Freudian psychoanalytic theory, and so you learn that. And you just have to study double time if your thoughts are different. Then you have to do that independent study and be determined, okay, I have to learn this and I'm supposed to pass this exam, and so I learned that. But because my brain is telling me to investigate something that is not being discussed, I will be a serious student and pursue that. And I will let my respect for myself validate my investigation. You see, you can try to bring up other ideas, but if the situation looks like they don't want to discuss other ideas, then you sit quietly and you learn what they are teaching and know that your pursuit of other information will be your own independent study. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Good to hear from you, Paraz. The person that dialed in 9776. Did you have a question for Dr. Welsing? The person who dialed in, last four digits, 9776. Did you have a question? Oh.
Yes, I did. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight, Dr. Welsing. It is such a pleasure to have you on tonight. My question to you is, what are your thoughts on how white people discharge the president by saying that he is a tool to the world bankers and that he is not running for anything.
Would you repeat that for me, Yvonne?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,
I think the question, she can let me know if I got it correctly. She said, what do you think about the people who say that President Obama is not really in charge, that he's just a tool of the world bankers? Did I get the question right?
that is correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Well, in other words, I would say none of us are doing everything that we want to do. We're not allowed. That's the purpose of talking about we are in a system structure of racism, white supremacy. Do you see, that would be like saying any parent, any black parent who wants their children to be educated, they are not necessarily in a position that they can change the educational situation where their child has to go to school. And even if they had money to send the child to an exclusive private school, that school is not teaching black self-respect, so that the children come out of that school wishing they were white. They might come out of a black school hating themselves as black people. So in other words, we are not in charge in the system of racism, white supremacy. We can do everything we can to understand it and to understand what behaviors will begin to counter that system. Just like when we respect ourselves, we are countering the system. When we respect one another, we are countering the system. When we are not squabbling and fighting with one another, we are countering the system. When we are courteous and respectful to one another, we are countering the system. When we are refusing to fight and kill each other, we are countering the system. You see, so for those people who choose to, well, let me understand this system and I want to do what I can do as an individual to counter it, I first have to have an awareness of what the system is and what does white supremacy mean. White supremacy means just that. That people who classify themselves as white are in charge. They can choose to let somebody into the White House who didn't have an invitation. So that's what, do you see, if we understand it, it's just like, okay, I'm sitting down at the chessboard with a master chess player. I'm on the black side of the chessboard. Now I can decide I'm going to sit here and play until I master this game. But am I playing against somebody who's a master chess player? I have to recognize that. Did they tell me all the rules? No, they didn't. I have to learn them myself because I'm determined to understand what exactly is going on, which is why black people keep asking, hey, what's happening? There's a reason that that question comes into our minds all the time, because we have been told incorrectly. We're told we're in a system of democracy, but we are actually in a system of racism, white supremacy. And because we are afraid of confronting racism, white supremacy, we will tell ourselves, oh no, that doesn't exist. That's old school. So President Obama is not in charge. He can do as best he can, just like any black person. If a person is a teacher, and they are told what they're supposed to teach to the exam and account for every minute of what they're doing in the classroom. And there's no time to tell children about racism, white supremacy. There's no time to teach them to love and respect themselves as black children. So the teacher's not doing whatever it is that she wants to do. I applied for a job at a clinic one time, some time ago, and the person told me, "You have an excellent reputation as a psychiatrist, but you talk about racism, and our staff is white, and so you would make them uncomfortable talking about racism, so no, you can't have the job." But all the patients were black. You have an excellent reputation as a psychiatrist, but you make white people uncomfortable because you talk about racism. So you can't use your excellent expertise in dealing with all the patients who are black. So we are not in charge. But then if you understand that, then you will say, well, okay, well, let me see how on the side I will do what I think needs to be done. But I don't decide to do that by not, by refusing to understand, well, what is the reality of the situation that I am in? Like when I was growing up, the teachers and the parents used to say, you've got to be 10 times as good. That was their way of talking about racism and the kinds of things where you would be blocked just doing average. So you have to be 10 times as good dealing with the system of racism, white supremacy. I had a parent call me asking for an appointment this week whose child is in a very, very prestigious white private school. And the parents said that their child was the best student in a math class, outstanding performance, but never given the grade that she deserved to have because she was the only black child in the class. I mean, very recently, a black child, I think in Illinois, maybe Chicago, was outstanding student. Should have been the valedictorian. Was told, no, you can't be the valedictorian because you're black. So this is just the evidence that we're in a system of racism, white supremacy. So, it's our intelligence is recognizing and seeking to understand this system that impacts the president, I'm sure Michelle Obama has to worry, I hope my husband is going to be safe. Worrying in a way that Bill Clinton didn't have to worry about Hillary Clinton, or George Bush didn't have to worry. I mean, his wife didn't have to worry. Barbara Bush didn't have to worry. Or Laura didn't have to worry. Because they didn't have all this racist animosity going on around their husbands. So who is in charge in a system of racism, white supremacy? Now that can change to the extent that the people of color, the victims of racism, white supremacy, begin to understand the system and understand what behavior. See, every black person who thinks they hate President Barack Obama is helping, aiding the people who said they want to make him fail. They want to make sure he's a one-term president. That's the voice of racism, white supremacy. So any black person, see, if I'm in a system, and it's like, what do they say? Ignorance is no excuse in the law. So I can be in a system if I don't understand that I'm in a system, and so I'm behaving in a certain way. It's like black men and black women thinking they hate each other because the system is making them feel that way. But they don't understand the system is making them feel that way because their lives are so frustrated by the system. And they are blaming each other as opposed to helping each other oppose the system. So the fact that a person is ignorant and taking a certain position because of the ignorance, the lack of understanding, the lack of knowledge, that's what I mean by ignorance. So if I'm helping my oppressor, even though I don't understand it, I'm still helping my oppressor. That's why it's incumbent upon us. The most important work we have to do as black people in the 21st century is to master an understanding of racism, white supremacy, which is self-respect, because we are all the time saying, what's happening? Well, what's happening is racism, white supremacy. Well, since I'm always saying what's happening, let me do my best to understand it out of respect for my brain computer raising that question over and over and over and over again. See, if a person is in prison, it's wise for them to understand they're not the warden. President Obama is not the warden. He has a nice title, just like a black person who's made CEO of a Fortune 500 company. They have a nice title. They are not totally in charge. And they're wise when they understand that. Maybe it takes, by the time they make their third decision, and somebody says, now, Bill, I don't think we're going to do that. You made some nice suggestions about who to hire. We're moving now in another direction, so we won't be able to bring those hirees on. Smart people. You really listed some smart people. We won't be able to bring them on now. The decision was made by our investors. Next.
The person that dialed in, last four digits, 6151. 6151. Did you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Oh, hi everybody. How you doing, Gus T and Dr. Wilson?
Greetings.
Yes.
It's an honor to speak to you, Dr. Wilson. I have two questions.
Give them to me one at a time, please.
Okay. My first question would be, if President Obama did take a more open stance on racial issues, not only would it make it hard for him, but my question would be, wouldn't it make it more harder for the average non-white person in America? And my second question was,
Let LeVar, would you please repeat the question for me?
Oh, sure. I think, caller, she said she can take them one at a time, so I'll let her respond to this one, and then we'll get your second question.
okay.
I think the caller, his question was, if President Obama, if he takes a more open stance and is talking publicly about racism, he said he thinks that would have negative repercussions for President Obama, but his question was, do you think that would also have a negative impact on non-white people in the United States, just regular non-white people?
That it would have a negative impact?
Yes. Do you think it would have a negative impact? Like with
if he talked more openly about racism?
Correct.
Well, I think it would have a negative impact on him, and it therefore could have, for example, David Duke, the white supremacist, he said the best thing that could happen would be that a black man would be elected president, because it would wake white people up to what their responsibilities are. Do you see? I think that people who classify themselves as white, not every single one perhaps, but many of them are thinking, what's uppermost in their thinking is that they are getting ready to be a minority, and the people of color will be the majority. And so that's why they have stand your ground laws. I was reading an article in the New York Times the other day about, in Oklahoma, you're going to be able to carry your gun on right on the outside. It doesn't have to be concealed. So everybody can be packing their gun, those who don't have a criminal record. So that means a whole lot of non-white people are going to be left out of those who can get a license to carry a gun openly. So I think that if he talked more about racism, it's like the Attorney General came out with that very important question, are we a nation of cowards, not being able to talk about racism? But that topic cooled out. So black people, instead of looking to the president to do everything for black people, why not black people deciding that they are going to talk amongst themselves and with each other, and every opportunity that they get, that they're going to talk about racism? Instead of, why isn't he talking about it? Well, let me talk about it. I'm going to talk about it instead of denying that it exists. Do you see what I'm saying? So that everybody really looks upon themselves as a leader. Well, if the president doesn't talk about it, or the president's not allowed to talk about it, well, I guess I won't talk about it either, as opposed to, well, maybe the president can't talk about it. I mean, there have been articles written about how his advisors will not let him talk about racism. Just like his advisors said, well, in the first debate, don't come on too strong. There was a white female who does analyses of behavior, reading body language, and she was questioned to give comments on the president's behavior. And she just said openly, a black man can't talk assertively and aggressively to a white man without being in trouble with white people. So, again, instead of, well, what's he done? He hasn't done anything for me, but if you really look at what he's done, jobs and money to the historically black colleges, et cetera, think, well, I guess he's doing the best he can, and let me try to do the best I can. We are all under trying circumstances. See, how many black people on a job, they are discriminated against, don't get promotions, don't get salary increases? How many black people on a job will raise a complaint? They'll talk about it on the parking lot, but will they stand up on the job and take a position? The answer many times is no. But they'll say, well, how come President Obama is not doing this and this and this and this and this and this? See, but again, that's understand the people on the job are afraid if they make a complaint, they might lose their job. And I'm sure the president is saying, well, I would like to bring up racism. I did say that it's an important topic, but they've told me not to talk about it. And I got all these death threats. So I guess I'll cool it.
Caller, if you want to ask your second question.
Yeah, my second question was that even like in ancient Rome, they had Septimius Severus, who was an African emperor of Rome, but it did not make Rome more lenient on Africans and Africa in general. So wouldn't it be naive to think that American policies would change about non-white people just because we have a person of color in the head office? And my second, I want to just make a statement. I agree with Ms. Welsing, Dr. Welsing, but my point was asking the first question was, by his success, wouldn't we be punished in everyday life as average non-white people? Would we be punished because of the president's success? And I have heard in many cases people say they have been, by white people, they have been punished, sent home from school for wearing the Barack Obama T-shirt and, other things. But that's all I have to say.
Okay, LeVar, I'm going to have you give it to tell me again.
Okay. I guess with his last statement, he was just saying, the first question, he was saying that he thinks that if President Obama is successful, that just regular, everyday non-white people, they will be punished. That white people will take out their frustrations with President Obama on regular, everyday non-white people that they're in contact with, whether it's on the job or in a school or in the office, whatever the case may be, that we will be taking some lumps because white people are angry with President Obama. I think that was his statement on the first question. And then
I see. Well, I've heard some black people talk about, it's just like you listen to the news and they're talking about the rising level of racial tension in the country because this black man is pursuing a second term. And I've had people say to me that they experience the tension on the job in different situations that they're in. See, the question would be, it's like if he is too assertive around the question of race. Of course, black people would like him to just come out and address that. I would, but it's like at the same time I understand the restraint that he is under. But it's like we don't just sit because he's restrained. Everybody who feels, well, I'm going to speak and I'm going to talk about racism and I'm going to try to help other people understand the reality of racism and what we can do as individuals in our own lives to counter it. You see, but I think if he gets a second term, whether he is raising the issue. See, first of all, we have to consider what's going to happen on Election Day. Is the election going to be stolen? Is he unjustly going to be denied a victory by fooling around with the voting machines? So there's a reason that that in itself is taking place. So would I anticipate that there is going to be an increase in the racial tension, whether he brings it up or not, because the people who classify themselves as white are very uncomfortable with the idea of becoming a minority in this area of the world. And that's why, again, the law is about stand your ground. You think Trayvon Martin. You have your gun, you think this black person, it just came to your mind, well, maybe they're trying to do something. I'll shoot them. And I said, well, I'm just standing my ground. Can we expect to see more of that? I would not be surprised. So the other part of that, LeVar.
Oh, the question was, I don't remember the word he used, but he was saying, I think it was unrealistic to expect policy change that will be in favor of
Say that, I'm sorry, I lost that.
I think his question was, do you think it's unrealistic to expect policy change that would be favorable to non-white people just because President Obama gets another term?
Well, that's what the Republicans and the Tea Party people were pushing for. Everything that they were going to do away with because of the heavy impact that it would have on the lives of black people and other people of color. See, again, this is why my definition about racism is this is a system for white survival. So if I'm correct and white people are thinking bottom line, our survival as whites is at stake. And so the anticipation would the racism increase, or the evidence of racism increase. I mean, what do you think would be the impact if large numbers of white men are able to walk around with unconcealed guns on their hip? What do you think would be the implications for black people, black men in particular? Since you wouldn't be able to have the same percentage of black men walking around with guns. See, these are laws that the law in Oklahoma about an open carrying gun, I think, was just passed on Thursday. Stand your ground is in something like 26 states, maybe more by now. So this is why I say understanding what racism is, why it exists. It has a very critical purpose for people who classify themselves as white. This is for their survival under conditions that they feel are threatening where they're outnumbered by non-white people, and they're genetic recessive to them. So this doesn't mean go around hating white people, but it means if you sat down at a chessboard, you wouldn't waste any time hating your opponent. You just need to understand the game and understand what particular game the opponent is playing. No time to hate, but a whole lot of time to understand. Next.
Let's see. My co-host Justice, she's also with us. She has a couple questions as well. Justice, if you have some questions, your line should be open.
Greetings, Dr. Welsing. Can I be heard?
Greetings. Mm-hmm.
I want to know if you disagree or agree with the following statement. White people have the power to decide who gets and who doesn't get to be president.
Say that again, dear. I'm sorry.
Okay. I just want to know if you agree with the statement or disagree with the statement. White people have the power to decide who gets and who doesn't get to be president.
I would say
with
yes.
it? Okay.
Yes, I would agree with that. They have the power to decide. But knowing that, black people could have a response. In other words, if white people have the power to decide, what is it that black people or other people of color would want to decide? What do they think? See, white people might be saying they don't think that another black person should ever be president of the United States again. Black people could have another opinion. And it depends on what behaviors the black people are willing to put behind what it is that they have in mind. I think that if black people feel after this election that the election was stolen, that black people can say, well, we're blacking out Thanksgiving and Christmas. Black people are not going to buy any turkeys, no dressing, no cranberries, and not going to spend any money on any Christmas presents. If they think the election has been stolen or that there's been some tampering with the results. After they make up their mind that they're going to vote and exercise their vote in the knowledge of what the system is about. So in other words, they have to decide who's going to run for president and who's not. But black people understanding the system, the question becomes, what decisions are they making out of their respect for themselves and their respect for one another? See, again, you oppose racism, white supremacy, for the purpose of replacing it with justice. And so that our behavior 24/7 should be shaped around our desire, our determination that we are going to replace a system of injustice with a system of justice.
Do you think white people are going to have President Obama be president again?
I'm sure there are some people who are going to vote for him. There's some people who might be able to overcome a racist response and act in their own self-interest. You see, who will see that his health care proposal and what he has done so far to bring jobs to different communities. It's not all the jobs yet that people would like to have, but, you know, we're dealing with a whole global economy, what's happening all over the world. And so there will be some white people. I mean, there are white people. The mayor of New York Bloomberg endorsed the president. So there will be white people who will be able to, maybe there'll be a lot of white people who will operate on the basis of racism. Maybe there'll be white people who will operate in what they really see as their self-interest. I mean, the people who were saying that they wanted to do everything to make the president fail in spite of how it would hurt people. So you have people who, I want to make this black man fail, even though it may hurt a lot of other people. And so maybe there'll be people who say, well, even if I don't like the idea of a black man, he has better ideas than the white man who is running that might help the people of the country.
For this year's 2012 presidential election, have you voted or are you going to vote?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to vote for President Barack Obama and try to influence everybody that I know to take that same step.
Why do you want to vote for him? Just curious.
As I've already said, he's a black man who is trying to do his best.
Mm-hmm.
And we are in a system of racism where people want to see him fail because he is a black man. And so countering racism, it's racism that makes people say, I want to see him fail because he is a black man. Counter racism is no. I'm going to do what I can to see that he has a chance to succeed.
Okay. Thank you.
Imagine if you were a parent and Barack Obama was your son. Would you want him to succeed? That's a question.
Okay.
What's your answer?
I would say yes, since he is a non-white person. I do like to see non-white people succeed,
see, he's your son. See, he's your son, and you've worked hard to see that he gets an education. And he got an education, got married, has a nice wife, has nice children. Would you want him to succeed?
Yes.
Good.
But only if it's something constructive.
Like healthcare and funding the historically black colleges and trying to improve education. Those are some of his goals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Welsing, for answering my question.
Okay, very good. Good questions.
Gus, go right ahead.
909, if you want to get your other question in.
Yeah, can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
This is not, Dr. Wells, you probably haven't heard this, but Barack Obama, he was, they tried to blame him for the Hurricane Sandy, and white people sent in a lot of money on that crazy premise, and it's just unbelievable. But my question is, I've been seeing a lot of people talk about Mitt Romney and his running mate, saying that they're racist. They're saying don't vote for Mitt Romney. They're telling their readers and listeners, don't vote for Mitt Romney and his running mate because they're racist. And they present all this evidence, Mitt Romney being a Mormon and having, the Book of Mormon talk about black people being servants and inferior, and Rand Paul, or his background being racist. So my question is, when white people are calling out other white people in a serious way, producing evidence that's pretty undisputable as being racist, is that, what do you think about that? It seems kind of strange to me that white people would just say, don't, this guy is racist. I mean, I'm hearing that, I just hear
You're
that.
You're saying white people calling other white people racist?
Mitt Romney and his running mate, yeah, they're saying don't vote for them because they're racist.
Well, I think I would answer it in this way. I mean, racism is white supremacy. Racism is behavior on the part of individual and collective of people who classify themselves as white. And so really they are in the best position to know whether somebody is racist or not. And so to the extent that they are sincere about pointing out what is racist, I think that that's constructive.
Okay.
See, sometimes white people will ask me, Dr. Welsing, how can I help? And I say, tell black people what white people talk about when there's no black people around. So white people are having a lot of discussion, serious discussion, all the time, 24/7, that they don't reveal to black people. I had a white professor at American University say to me, Dr. Welsing, on all social occasions, this is a white female professor, she said, on all social occasions, when it's white people gathered and there's no black people around, she said, we are talking negatively about black people. And the assumption is that everybody present is in agreement. She said, I hate to admit it. I told her I understood that because they're just talking code about the maintenance of their system. So anybody who's listening, if they have a so-called white friend, you can ask them, what do you all talk about when there's no black people around? I wager the person is going to go silent. Because they're talking code about their survival. That's what the system of racism is all about. See, I didn't ask her to tell me that. She just told me that. Because she heard me talking in a prison to black prisoners about racism. And so she volunteered that information. I told her I understood. See, and people, the thing now is for black people to say, I don't believe in any conspiracy theory. Conspiracy is a very good word in the dictionary. And it's a word that means some people are talking about something that they don't share with the people who are going to be affected. So racism, white supremacy is itself a conspiracy. Because the people who are affected are told that they are in a democracy. They are not told the ins and outs of what is really taking place. And that's what the professor was saying. We are talking negatively on all social occasions. I didn't try to force her to say anything about white people. That's what she said, on all social occasions when there are no black people present. We are talking negatively about black people, and the assumption is that everybody present is in agreement. In agreement about the conspiracy to how white people are going to survive when they are a tiny minority on the planet and getting ready to be a minority here. See, all we have to do is think about, if we did a lot of reading, studying our own history, read about life on the plantation. See, when they're on the plantation, you have a big house and a slave master and his family, and maybe some white overseers. And there would be hundreds of slaves, enslaved African people. So what did they have to do to stay in charge? Let's give a max 12 white people in the big house and 300 slaves, enslaved African men and women. So how did they stay secure? They stayed secure by beating the black people whenever they thought it was necessary, killing them whenever they thought it was necessary, so they would learn how to stay in their place. Training them that if they got upset, they can kill each other, but then they would get beaten because a slave would have some value. See, black people need to talk more to white people and ask white people, what are they really thinking about? What are they thinking about becoming a minority? What do they plan to do about it? See, for all the black people who talk about race doesn't matter and they believe in diversity and they have all kind of friends, well, ask your friend. If there are black people who are sleeping with white people, having sex with white people, ask those people. What do white people talk about? You can ask in the middle of the sex act. What do white people talk about when there are no black people around? The sex act will stop. Next.
Just on 909's second question there, when he was asking about these white people who have been accusing other white people of being racist, and I have seen a lot of that. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, he came out, he was the one, he's a Republican, and he said that former Governor Sununu's accusation that Colin Powell is only supporting President Obama because they're both black, he said he thought that was racist, and then he went on to say that he thought the Republican Party was full of racists. This was just 2 weeks ago. Bill Mayer has been another one. Chris Matthews. I am still suspicious. I think we all can think of examples of white people alleging to be anti-racist, saying that they don't support racism, don't practice racism, but that not being true. One of these white men, Bill Mayer, he has been calling out Donald Trump and some of these other white people and saying, hey, they're racist. He called out Sarah Palin when she said President Obama was shucking and jiving at the third debate. He called her out and said, hey, that is racist. You would only say shucking and jiving to a black person. Bill Mayer, same guy, turned around and started teasing Congressman John Boehner about his skin complexion. And I said, now wait a minute, major highlight. Now you got a white person who says he's against racism, but he's teasing another white person about his skin complexion. Does that stand out to you, Dr. Welsing?
Well, I think the most important thing for black people is to be able to say when we use the word racism, we mean white supremacy. And this is what we understand racism, white supremacy to mean. So that black people are functioning on their own understanding of what racism, white supremacy is, and not just getting carried away because, you know, one white person is calling another white person a racist. It's, you know, a good question would be, well, Bill Mayer, what is your understanding of racism? You know, say, as a black person, I'm seriously interested in what do white people understand when they use the word racism, whether they're saying racism doesn't exist or whether they're saying racism does exist. What exactly is the definition that they are using? Because, again, I would say that, you know, I tell people there is only one John Brown. In all this history, there was one John Brown. You see, who picked up a gun against slavery, against white supremacy. And so the question is instead of black people thinking that they're going to have friends, that they need to understand exactly what are you talking about? What do you really understand racism to be? Is racism just somebody calling a black person a nigger? Or do you understand racism to be a system for white genetic survival that functions in economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war? That has gone on in this part of the world for the last 500 years. So if, Mr. Meyer, if you are talking against it, are you saying that you want this system to come to an end as soon as possible? Then he might start, well, I don't know about that, but I just know he said something that sounded a little bit racist to me. But do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely. This Bill Mayer, at least, he is known to have engaged in sexual intercourse with black females. In fact, he accused Ann Coulter, a white woman, he accused her of being a racist, and she came out immediately on television and said, wait a minute now, where did he get his credentials as a white person to say that he's not a racist? Just because he has sex with a black female? She cut to the chase real quick. So, yeah, that...
Isn't she supposed to be relating to a black man? Or?
Ann Coulter?
Yeah.
Why? I hadn't heard that before. I hadn't heard that before.
Check it out. I don't know, but I thought someone said that to me. But that doesn't, you know, again, what do we see? In other words, we have been the victims of racism. And it's up to the victims to understand as best they can what has happened to them in the course of their history and why has it happened. And it's up to them to determine what they are going to do about it. Each individual assuming a leadership role in what are they going to do about this reality that has impacted their lives, impacted the lives of their ancestors, and will impact the lives of their children should they have any.
Wow. Again, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, I don't want to keep your whole evening. Last question so we can let you get some rest and continue your work. Just checking the news again. Reading is more important than watching television. I was checking the news yesterday, and Serena Williams, Venus Williams, they are doing a tour in Africa. They were in Nigeria earlier this past week. They also visited South Africa to promote tennis, and they've been giving motivational talks and all that. They played a few exhibition games. Anyway, while they were in Nigeria, they gave a statement to the press that is stunning. Now, their visit to Africa has been covered widely. It was reported in the USA Today, Los Angeles Times, the Huffington Post, Fox News, BBC, New York Times, CNN, widely reported. They left out one major footnote when they talked about their visit that I only saw it in the Nigerian Tribune. I had to read the Nigerian paper to get this tidbit. While they were visiting Lagos, the sisters, they were talking publicly, and this is what they said. Meanwhile, tennis icons Venus and Serena Williams say the greatest obstacle they have met in their career is the scourge of racism. It has been fun playing tennis. Champions have come and gone. We respect everybody who has stepped on the other side of the court. Venus, the older of the sisters, told journalists on Friday in Lagos when asked who their toughest opponent was. The greatest obstacle we had faced were those who at this stage caused racial uproar. We can't stand them, added Serena. In polite society, you don't like the chorus of boos or the shouts of nigger. It has happened to us before, and on that occasion it was unbelievable to hear such nonsense while walking down the aisle to the players' box by the side of the court. Reported this was just yesterday in the Nigerian Tribune. They omitted the part about racism being their greatest obstacle in all of the other reports for all of the other news outlets.
Is that right?
Only in the Nigerian Tribune. I just wanted to share that and see if you had any thoughts.
Oh, no, I mean, of course. You see it happening if you watch the tennis games, you know. But I think that that's very important to know that they made that statement. But again, what does that say? That just speaks to the fact that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy. And no matter how superb you are, you will encounter it. I mean, Serena Williams, I've heard her spoken of as the best female to ever play the game. And so to hear them, and, you know, while we're talking about it, I think that black people should also focus on their father, Richard Williams. There's no other father in the history of the game that has made champions like Serena and Venus Williams. You see, where he determined before they were born, I'm going to produce two children who are going to be the best, or certainly amongst the best in the world. And people need to give that black man a tremendous amount of credit. Of course, his wife as well. You see, but he made those tennis players. A black father. So I use that example. I mean, of course, there are millions of others. But it's a tribute to a black man who, as a husband and father, decided what he was going to do. Produce the best tennis players. Some of the best in the world. And in spite of the obstacles of racism, first of all, he knew that I want to keep them home and train them myself so that they will not be beaten down at an early stage in their lives. and their confidence and their identity with self will be built at home. And so they will be able to deal with the world. It doesn't mean that they won't feel the blow of the system that we are in. But I just thought I'd throw that in.
Outstanding. There's a great documentary on Mr. Williams and, you know, a lot of what they were doing when they were growing up and training them and everything, where he talks quite a bit about racism and how that impacted him, and you get to hear from them as well. But
but his knowledge of that helped him understand what he had to do with training his children at home to believe that they could be the best in the world. He didn't leave it to other people. So I commend him. At the same time, I commend them. Commend the mother, too. We're going to produce some of the best in the world, or the best in the world.
I would tell any of the non-white people, I put the article to the Nigerian Tribune. I put that on my blog. I put it on Facebook as well, so you can read what they wrote. And I also linked to all of the other major news outlets that reported on their trip to Africa, so that you can see all of them. I mean, we're talking, 8 major news outlets. All of them omitted their commentary on racism. And CNN, they have video footage because they gave press conferences so you can see them, and they're hanging out with these young black children. You get a great illustration of what white people are comfortable with regards to how they view black people, what image, what they want us thinking about. CNN, the video footage, what they have in the caption: Williams sisters show off their dancing moves, and they got them dancing and having fun with these kids. We would much rather show you these black champions dancing, being silly, as opposed to them having serious dialogue about the monumental problem that racism has been for both of them. Real important, I thought. Really enjoyed having you on the program. I learned so much.
Well, I enjoyed being on your program, and I will commend you to the highest level for, having a program and digging out all the information that you dig out and share with others. You're making a tremendous contribution.
We hope so. As I said, we're just really grateful anytime that we have an opportunity to learn from you, and hopefully to apply the information that you share with us and the way that we think, speak, and act each day, and especially watching the way we interact with other non-white people and not blaming other victims for being victims of racism. So thank you, Dr. Welsing. We will continue to support your efforts. Please take excellent care. We're really glad that you made it through the storm safely, and we will be in touch. Please just continue the outstanding work and let us know. Oh, somebody told me that you were having an issue. They were trying to get a petition. They said that people were being, I guess, loud in your residential area.
Oh, yeah. It's a school next door to me, the Jewish Primary Day School, built a playground next to my house where I've lived for 40 years. And they bought up everything on the block other than my house, and so they would really like me to move, so I'm being bombarded with the playground noise. And for the last, going on to the 3rd year, so that's a whole big issue that I'm dealing with. I refer to it as aggressive gentrification.
Wow, is there a petition, or is there something people can do to help you with that problem?
Well, you all are far away. Do you have a fax number?
I can leave it on your voicemail. Yes, I can leave it on your voicemail. Will that work?
No.
Okay.
I tell you what, send me your address we're going to fax the article to me.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And then I will mail it back to you, so you can at least see what it's about.
Okay. I will do that. I'll do that. I'll fax you the D.L. Hughley report. It'll probably be in the morning, and then, yeah, if you shoot it back to me, we'll share.
Okay. Well, listen, again, very good, and I do praise you for all that you're doing. I mean, any of the programs that are, helping people think and raise questions, you're doing some very important work.
You as well, Dr. Welsing. Thank you so much. Everybody want to say good evening to Dr. Welsing? Folks on the line? They're not talking.
Well, thank you, Dr. Welsing.
All right. Well, listen, take care, and God bless.
Thank you. Have a great evening, Dr. Welsing. We will speak to you soon.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Bye now.
Context of white supremacy. Always great to hear from Dr. Welsing. Great insight. I will encourage folks, read the book. If you haven't read it, read the book. You definitely will get more information. It's always good to hear from her, but I think you'll add to your bank of knowledge if you go ahead and read the ISIS papers. Read it a few times. If you've read it once, read it more than once. A lot of people, they will watch movies and television shows over and over and over again. You can do the same thing with books, and I suspect you will learn more. We will be back. Should be on Tuesday. Looking forward to broadcasting while the election is going on. Tuesday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. We'll be able to kind of watch the news and see what they're saying, pick out racism. I'm sure there'll be some live slips where somebody will say something. Should be fun. I'll be looking forward to it, and maybe they'll come with the final results while we're on the air. And again, we can kind of take a look down the road, what we think is going to happen over the course of the next 4 years or so, regardless of who wins. See where things go. This Tuesday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Thank you, everybody, for tuning into the program. I hope it was a constructive investment of your Sunday evening. Support the cows. You can invest. You can share the links, put it on your webpage, Facebook, Twitter, whatever the case may be. Get other non-white people to just become more informed, less confused about racism, white supremacy, and the problems we face as non-white people worldwide. Justice's blog, justdojustice.blogspot.com. justdojustice.blogspot.com. Again, we'll be back on Tuesday. You can get the archives, this program. It'll be on iTunes, and definitely by the morning, probably before then. You can download it. I'll put the link on the Facebook page. Also on Stitcher.com. Any of the folks out there who have mobile devices, if you got a smartphone, Stitcher.com. All you have to do is go to the website. You can do a search on the Stitcher website for racism. Will be one of the top 2 programs that comes up. I put the link for where we're at on Stitcher. I put it on my Facebook page as well, but that's an easy way. If you are on the go or in your vehicle, easy way you can access the cows, and the archives are there as well. Stitcher.com. Thank you all for listening in. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. I think Dr. Welsing, she said having an understanding of racism, white supremacy equates to black intelligence. I dig that one. I will add that one to the one she's been saying before, that refraining from squabbling and arguing with other black people, victims of racism, is an exercise in black mental health and black self-respect. Hear, hear. Context of white supremacy signing out. Thank you all for tuning in.
Albinos that do make it to reproductive age can't find a mate because they look funny.